Today we are joined by some very special guests. As I introduce them, I would ask that they stand to be recognized. I would also ask that we hold our applause until all of our guests are standing. Starting with Brad Vonkman, the President of Alberta School Councils Association. This is a test we frequently fail. Carl German, President, College of Alberta School Superintendents. Michael Jans, Vice President, Alberta School Boards Association. And we are also pleased to welcome Drew Barnes, MLA for Cypress Medicine Hat. Welcome to all of you. We are also joined today by two community representatives. From Buffalo Trail Public Schools, we have Stephanie Spornitz, President of the Edgerton School Parent Council. Welcome, Stephanie. From Parkland School Division, we have Brenda Johnson, President, Spruce Grove Chamber of Commerce. Welcome. I will now introduce the 6 fine facilitators that we have assisting us today. Dr. Fred Renahan has enjoyed a varied and challenging career in the world of education. He was a teacher, principal, director of education, executive director of curriculum and instruction, and assistant deputy minister in the province of Saskatchewan. He has served as Dean, Faculty of Education at Brandon University in Manitoba, and Superintendent of the Surrey School District in British Columbia. Fred has taught in the graduate program in educational leadership at Simon Fraser University. Welcome, Fred. Dr. Pat Renahan is currently Professor and Director of the Saskatchewan Educational Leadership Unit, having served as Head of the Department of Educational Administration, University of Saskatchewan, for the past 11 years. He studied at the University of London, United Kingdom, and the University of Saskatchewan prior to completing his PhD in 1977 at the University of Alberta. Pat's teaching areas are organizational theory, school renewal, instructional leadership, and research methods. Pat has served in various teaching and administrative capacities in the education system, and for 9 years as a school trustee. Welcome, Dr. Pat Renahan. Patty Dietrich served as a school trustee with Clearview Public Schools for almost 12 years, and as President of the Public School Boards Association of Alberta from 2009 to 2013. Highlights of her work include working with and learning from trustees and boards across the province, advocacy work with MLAs and government ministers, and the association's work on the Education Act and regulatory review. Patty and her husband Dave live in Edmonton now, where they own and operate a consulting company working with municipalities in the areas of land use planning, administration, long-term strategic planning, and compensation review. Welcome home, Patty. Joyce Dvornik has been a trustee since 1998. She also served 2 terms as a counselor for the MD of Big Lakes. Joyce and her husband David have been married 38 years and live on a farm where they have a small cow-calf operation. She is an LPN and works full-time at the High Prairie Hospital. Joyce is the proud mom of a son and grandmother of 3 beautiful granddaughters. Welcome, Joyce. Karen Scholl. Karen has been a trustee since 2004, representing Ward 1 in High Prairie School Division. Karen and her husband Mike have been married 19 years and have 3 children, Mason, Tanner, and Camden? Beautiful name. They live on a farm just outside of Falher. Karen is a registered massage therapist and also works in a doctor's clinic. Karen is a very involved community member. Welcome. Kim Bader. Kim has served on the Board of Trustees for Canadian Rockies Public Schools since 2001, including 10 years as the chair of that board. Kim has played a central role in the board's approach to inspiring hearts and minds, developing CRPS as a learning organization, and creating a collaborative approach to leadership and community involvement. He has guided the work of the district around generative governance and community engagement, drawing upon his roles with Community Foundations of Canada and leadership development at the Banff Centre. Welcome, Kim. And now I ask you for one final warm PSBA welcome to all our facilitators as I invite Fred and Pat to begin our work today together.
Good morning. Greetings from the current Grey Cup champions. By the sound of it, it's not much longer, but it was just a wonderful occasion in Saskatchewan. And in some ways, you know, it has sort of redrawn the map, you know. When you look at it. So we might as well enjoy it while we've got the chance. It's really great to be back. You know, this is kind of a home from home for Fred and I, an opportunity for Fred to get away from the trials and tribulations of Palm Springs. And it's lovely to come back. It's interesting, over a period of a year, what changes, you know. It seems a long time since Saskatchewan became the Grey Cup champions. But there's a lot of things happened, you know, and things change in our lives. I retired. There's nothing changed in my life. I'm still doing the same work, but I'm not being paid anymore. The same kind of stuff. And Fred, of course, he's still moving on there. He had a very special birthday, October 3rd. He turned 80. No, actually, but he's, it's in the mode of celebration here. Here it says, despite last week's layoffs, we'll continue with our motivational seminars. And and the different, a little thing on terrorism here. Kind of topical and sad. That's an Irish terrorist, Arab terrorist. There's a Canadian terrorist. We identify with that more and more. And what we're looking at here is the overview for our day here, the commitments, building trusteeship and community engagement, maintaining the dream, and forward thinking. And that's what we're about in relation to the work we're going to be doing today. It's a mission that we were given by the committee, by the executive, and these 4 commitments are commitments that you have developed together. And so Fred and I, in planning what we're about over these 4 years, was identifying the broad themes that we would deal with. We deal with them all the time, but the emphasis that we place on individual themes are dictated by those 4 broad areas of your mission. And the culturing and engaging communities, the leading function, the maintaining the dream, strategizing, and then finally in that final year, that 4th year, visioning. You know, what kind of legacy will we be leaving for the future, and then in terms of actioning the framework, the commitments initially, the basic principles that we kicked around last year in a nutshell, effective trusteeship and effective governance and policy making in a time of change. And today, University 2, the commitments in prospect, capacity building for engagement and governance. And congratulations and welcome community members to this broader discussion, because that's the essence of community engagement, and it's really brilliant. That's excellent to see that representation, that involvement of community at this level. And I guess that's what today is all about. How does that flow through the system? And we'll chat about the organization of that.
I think it's important for us to also remind ourselves of what we did last year and what kinds of things we talked about in terms of effective governance, because that is a thread which is going to flow through all of the three areas of commitments in prospect and commitments in action and certainly commitments in retrospect. So today, although we are going to be talking a lot about whatever it was that was on the last screen, because he's retired. He does these kinds of things since he retired. You know,
and you've got license to do it when you're retired. This is
license. So, okay. Good. So there are certain questions that are going to sort of emerge, and certainly we're going to be wanting you to engage in table talk around them. First of all, there are questions, large questions. What is engaged governance? Who and what are our relevant communities? How and why are we engaging our communities? Why would we need to do that? I think these are all pivotal, foundational questions that we need to address before we start to engage in what we think is effective engagement of our community.
And secondly, our second broad commitment, are we staying relevant? How are our contexts changing? What are our continuing and emerging possibilities and opportunities? What have been our accomplishments, and how do we celebrate our success? And in relation to keeping the dream alive. And then in terms of forward thinking, visioning and goal setting and evaluating, how have we done during the course of our term? And what does that mean as we move forward? What remains to be done? What legacy will we be leaving? And that is the stuff of the issues and the discussions that we'll have that will come. And then governing forward, if you like, you know, to talk about paying forward, I guess in essence, how do we govern forward? And what are we preparing? What will people who come onto this board down the years be inheriting as a result of the work that we've been doing? And the concern for transition, I think, is an important one. And we talk a lot about that. How do we leave it? How do we move on? How do we pass the torch to future generations and future boards? And of course then, the commitment to community engagement. And Fred and I, you know, we're fond of this particular slide. It's a guy sitting at the end of the draw, and he's having a great time, and he's in his own world, but he's not quite aware of what's coming down the draw. And it says under here, "Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam." And that, you know, that is, in a way, governance and the lives of individuals involved in governance. It's that the awareness of what is coming, of our irrelevant environment. And when we think in terms of community, sometimes the surprises may be because of a variety of issues and a variety of problems, might be very difficult problems and difficult issues to deal with. So how does the communication work? So today, in a nutshell then, what are we about? We want to review the underlying arguments and dimensions of engaged governance, and we'll do this during this particular session, to reflect on the work and possibilities of engaged governance in the context of our own board. And we will have a fair amount of table talk around that.
As we planned this, we were very mindful of wanting, and your executive were too, of wanting to hear the experiences of other boards with engaged governance and the practice of governance teams. And I'm particularly excited about, learning from the practitioners and the boards and trustees around those kinds of issues. It's what we talk about when we're talking about, sort of practice in action.
And what are the possibilities of collaboration there? And we're defining it. And Fred and I were running through our slides here the other day, and we thought, we haven't really defined governance. And where we're coming from here, and you can kind of kick this around during the course of the day, but what does it mean, engaged governance? And we're saying, for starters here, and it may change by the end of the day, that's for sure, in the context of education, the empowerment of a school system's publics and the enrichment of their involvement in matters of importance to them in the interests of enhancing the educational outcomes for students. And I guess that's a matter of keeping your eye on the ball. What are we about? What is central to our mission and our vision? And it is essentially student performance.
We'd certainly be interested in your take on, what engaged governance is and how you would define it. Because certainly Pat and I had spirited disagreement about what should be in there. So as we go through, we might want you to reflect on that and help Pat out a bit.
And so, as part of that, and when you look at the kinds of things that we've been kicking around during the course of last year and the spring before, when we did some work with you at your spring assembly, and there's the echoes of some of those kinds of discussions that come back into this, but in a different context. And the argument then for engaged governance is really inherent in these kinds of ideas. The effective boards focus on student achievement. They allocate resources to needs, rather than just purely interests. And I guess that's part of it.
On investment, regular measurement and reporting of results. Teachers in BC are not fond of this particular responsibility of boards, but how on earth do you have accountability to your public if you can't adjudicate and let people know how kids are doing in school? It's what we call a sine qua non. It is fundamental to your job, and it has to do and right to the heart of accountability.
And they engage the communities they serve, and that's the bottom line. And that could have been a bit of a throwaway when we were looking at that earlier on, but today it takes on very significant meaning. And then inspiring the vision, and the other very significant piece here, and that's the Alberta focus on inspiring education. How do we inspire the vision? How do we inspire community engagement? And all those themes come back into play.
And we would be interested today to learn how that particular initiative of Alberta Education, which looked so fresh and promising 3 years ago, how it's doing now.
And how do we do these kinds of things in community? And the core values.
That struck some kind of chord. We'd be interested to hear from the presenters later on about some of that.
And the core values of opportunity, fairness, citizenship, choice. And dealing with that, how can we better address those kinds of issues in community and with our relevant communities?
One of the things that we haven't talked about too much, but it appears to us we need to talk about it sometime. And I'm hearkening back to BC. It was a terrible year in BC last year.
Sad.
Teachers went on strike.
A sad year.
The government locked them out. They said they weren't coming back, and the government said, okay. I think that the teachers figured that the government would legislate them back, because that's what happened in the other occasions. So they could really, sort of, put the hammer down. But this time the government said, we're not going to legislate you back. And the BCTF, for whatever reason, dug in their heels and said, fine. And a lot of the younger teachers, the neophytes, had a really hard time because they lost salary for, a few months. And I rather think that a lot of them have got very jaundiced about their profession and are kind of looking in different directions.
Yeah. And that's the legacy
now, yeah,
that
but
you
the
don't
point,
want to leave.
The point I'm saying is that there are some things about governance that are out of your control as trustees. And boards struggled with, with how to respond and what their role was in terms of, and whose side to take and how they can talk to their teachers and this kinds of thing. And that's really, really important in terms of, crisis management and how we maintain the stewardship of the system, which you're still responsible.
So we're still making an argument for engaged governance there, and inherent in the vision is the board representation of stakeholders, flexibility and discretion, striving for excellence. But then, what is the opportunity for community in relation to all of that? In terms of district, we shared with you that particular district leadership for engagement and talking about the investments and the metaphor of the capital and to what extent is community engagement a means of building that capital in all of these senses. Intellectual capital, the knowledge and skills of those who work with students. And what is the role of community in relation to that? Where are our sources of information and support? Social capital, spiritual capital, financial capital, and is there? Can we broaden our discussion of those investments to a broader community rather than purely the governance community? And then the impact of changing context. And that's where Fred and I wanted you to kick some ideas around in a different sense. You did it with us a couple of years back, but we'd like you to do that now with the notion of community in mind here. What is your context? And how is it changing? It's changing drastically over in a relatively short period of time. And we're finding in some systems the nature of the population is changing, the nature of knowledge is changing, the nature of the volume of knowledge is changing in technology and so on. And what is the impact of that on the way in which we work as boards and the needs that we have as individual boards to work more collaboratively with other groups?
So the three questions around that particular slide in terms of context is how do you and how are you responding to changing context? And you all have context. Some of the contexts have a universal application. Some are unique to your school districts and have to be dealt with.
And how adaptable are you as a board? How culturally competent are you as a board? And also with changing populations. And with those questions then, how have recent changes affected the type of educational governance we need? But specific to our interest here, how have recent changes affected our approach to engaging relevant communities? And how valuable to us are our communities in terms of addressing that issue? So there it is. That's a table talk.
That's what we want you to do.
And we'll
You've
come
talked
around
about
and
these
supervise.
before, but the context may have changed since the last time we talked about it. I'm really interested in the recent issue around Ebola. You know, a context that just comes out of the blue. And what we're beginning to realize is there are hundreds of ways to get it wrong in terms of response. And we seem to be finding them.
And Fred's board did all of those. No,
what are you talking about?
You can now carry on. We'll wonder, you've got 16 minutes to do this. Starting from now, so off you go.
And?
Very good.
Buffalo Trail, you could be first up.
Oh, by the way, yes. Just, we need a minute here. We found got some information from Buffalo Trail School Division last night. There's 6 of their board members have a birthday coming up in the next 5 days.
Can you believe that 6 of these people have birthdays coming up?
So it's
Your
ready.
birthday is today. Her birthday is today.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Buffalo Trail boy. Happy birthday to you. And many more. Now get back to work. It brings up some interesting issues. I see by your resume that you're my wife. And of course, yeah. So from here, we just wanted to get a couple of just sounders from your discussions, the kind of themes that you were kicking around broadly. So
I've got
Fred
a
is one
table
thing.
that could speak to something. Were you on task?
That's
The answer
bluebirds.
is yes, of course. Okay. What did you talk about at this table?
I might go off book, Darcy, so forgive me.
Speak up.
Scratch notes here. Despite what they do, our focus will get us through the uncertainty. The foundation is still our mission. There's been no significant change internally because of our mission. We've been able to just wait this period out. One of the comments was, we need to focus on what sticks when you leave. So it's not about the next 4 years, it's about the impact, the decisions we make, what's best for our kids 10 years from now, not today. Our motivation is still what we stick to. What's good about the past will survive. And I wrote down the act is the act, but I'm not, the school act is the school act, and that's the foundation of what we all can stand on.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, and what about this table here? Now, you had some comments to make.
That's so nice of you.
Interesting comments too.
I guess the comment is based on uncertainty. We have a change in leadership at a provincial government level. And with that change in leadership, there have been some actions that have been taken that are politically motivated, I would guess. Lots of money's being spent. But we are not hearing the support necessarily for the things that have been our underpinning for the last 3 or 4 years, inspiring education. We're seeing, I guess, a political distancing from the previous government and beyond that. So there's a little uncertainty in the air about the things that we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years and where that is going to lead in the future. So I, as a trustee, I'm a little concerned that the direction that we have been moving in moving into the 21st century, maybe somebody's going to put the brakes on that, and that's a definite change in the environment. So, anybody else around here wants to have a chat?
And like it or not, I guess the crisis of confidence in a way in governance itself. And you're inheriting some of those kinds of issues. And how do you cope with that? As Fred indicated, much of this is beyond your control.
Among the things we discussed was the changes to the accountability pillar that are going to be coming, so that there'll be less measures coming from Alberta Ed, but that we need to be able to go to our community, our students, our staff, general community, and seek information and input from them and discussions on what is important to you in how we measure success for our students. So that'll be interesting. We're excited about that, but that's a great way to engage the community in some new discussions.
Great. Thank you. And you know, and we want to come back into this type of discussion a little bit later on. But those basic questions around reading our publics, who are our publics? What does the public expect? How do we know? And it's that basic system intelligence that you up the ante on these activities.
Are the governments and public expectations the same? In the community in which I live, I would have to say that that there is no agreement on the expectations that communities have, as school communities I'm talking about, and what government expects. And sometimes government isn't communicating their expectations for the system in terms of, you know, policies and requirements and even curriculum.
And related to it, to whom are schools accountable? To our individual employees within the school division? How do they understand accountability? And are we on the same page system-wide around those basic questions? And do we engage discussion around those kinds of issues?
And when conflict happens, can we understand it, why it's happening, and if we're going to engage, are we able to do this in a civilized kind of manner?
And a couple of years back, we shared with you this just identification of types of public, but based on the general commitment. And Fred and I talk about decision-making and Bridges' model, that when we look at a particular public or a particular group and we pose the question, should we involve or how should we involve? Bridges talks about the two tests of expertise. Do they have the expertise to be involved in this particular area? And secondly, is it relevant? And but those very basic questions. But we do have a cynical public out there, in part. And what are they? And where are they? And do we understand? Are we able to read that? Some of them make themselves very visible, others not so much. The apathetic public. The individuals that aren't coming out, they're not interested in that. So there's a motivational kind of implication there. So how do we respond to apathy? I think it's information, it's motivation. And then the spectator public, the ones that are sitting back and they're watching and they're aware And maybe they'll jump on your case when they see something happening that's not necessarily to their liking. And it's how do you work and manage within that context. The supporter public, they're ones that are there, they're out there, they're selling chocolate-covered almonds or whatever it is, or the bake sale. And the advisory
finally,
public.
We look at what we'd all like to probably want to be and to have advisory publics and collaborative publics.
But it brings with them attention as well. Organizational theorists talk about participation, but participation at a cost. And there is a cost. They refer to it as the participative jungle. I mean, you've got to have a mechanism. If you've got individuals interested in it, your motivators are really working, and you've got community groups that are coming out, and they're getting involved all over the map, you are creating an expectation for hearing, for listening, and those kinds of mechanisms around collaborative groups, around particular aspects, and there's an energy there that you're really placing on the system. It's a tension, but it's an exciting one. What we're looking at here, Fred and I, just from from minimal involvement and engagement up to high-level collaborative engagement. And I guess there's a place for all of the above here. That we do need spectators. And maybe, there's an investment and divestment associated with all this. That communities, members have their own lives. As soon as they, have their own families and so on, they may be not able to invest at the same high level as other groups or individuals. And so it's a recognition of that need for investment and divestment in involvement. So I guess the point that we're making here is that you don't assume that you want to have everybody collaborating all under the sun. There's a need for respect for variety and life space and so on. Fred and I, are fond of that whole notion of the psychological contract between our community groups and our board in this case. And what does it look like? What are the expectations of our publics for you as a board? And what are the expectations of the board for our various publics? And as in a nutshell, Fred and I, when we're thinking about those kinds of issues, what might they look like? Support for public education. I think we do expect people to provide support for public education. And we're talking about broad generalities here. But on the other side of the coin, the public expects clear and consistent communication around educational initiatives and what's happening and changes and keeping people informed. And parents will tell you that time and time again in our research that that's one of the most common comments from parents and community groups is the need for communication. Communicate with us. And
so what we're saying is, I mean, as a board, could you sit down and figure out what the board expects, what you expect from your publics, from the parents of kids in school, and could you sit down and figure out what the public expects of you? Would it look like this? Would it look like that they would expect clear and consistent communication, a commitment to the best interests of the child?
Fred and I were talking to we mentioned this to you before, but we were talking to a parents' conference in Regina Public School Board, and they got all their parents together for a parent conference. Really good, and teachers involved. But Fred and I developed this kind of psychological contract, and like the slide you got in front of you there, we had the expectations that the school has for parents. And we put in consistency in the raising of children. And a hand went up at the back, and there was this parent, and she said, what right have you got, and what right have teachers got to be telling us how to raise our kids?
And I said, that was Pat's idea.
Yeah, right. But it's, I guess, providing forums for discussion of those kinds of things. And the forums themselves are, I think, a really good catalyst for meaningful involvement down the road, the holding of those kinds of discussions in themselves. Heaven knows it might be like the cartoon where you got one person. You know, today we're talking about public awareness. And now 6 partnership, and we want to wind up our session just dealing with these basic principles here. Partnership building principles. And we talk about flexibility, and that is the need maybe to think about that notion of investment and divestment of our groups. I think to start off with an expectation that individuals collaborate at a high level, I think it's unrealistic. And you know, what are the various types of involvement and engagement that individuals might have? And why not be transparent about that variety of levels, whether it's supporter, whether it's advisor, whether it's collaboration around significant issues. Inclusiveness. All voices are considered. And that is probably one of the biggest challenges we've got, isn't it? At getting everybody on board. And how do we reach out? Variety, multiple investment or involvement possibilities. And what are they? And I guess then it's thinking through that question of how should we involve? How can I as a parent be involved? And it's putting that kind of information out there. This is how, and it's an educative function in a way. How can you be engaged?
One of the issues that always comes up when we talk about this, it's like teachers in classrooms. You know, when if you're ever, you know, sort of wandering around and you're looking at how the teacher parent nights go and the interviews with parents. There's some kind of, teachers will often say, you know, when you talk to them about this, is that the parents they see are not really the ones that need to be seen. Because, you know, they don't show. And so it begs the question of, well, if they're not coming to you, what do you do? What are you doing? What kind of institutionalized practices have you to see that those parents don't fall through the cracks and that you can actually engage them? I mean, it's a difficult question for teachers, but how, in point of fact, do you do that?
And how do we discuss that with our own professionals within the system? And there's our table talk too, just for this final piece before we have our break. In building internal collaborative relationships and building external. Internal with our own professionals, with our own groups, and with our schools, and externally, and looking at that kind of term in a very broad sense, our community groups. What can we do? And looking at what are our success, first of all, I guess, what are our successes and what have we done well? And to think in terms of those 6 principles that we've given you also here. And we'll click that on the slide as you're discussing.
Right, you can go back to that. And the other thing I think, when you're talking about this, is be interested in knowing whether, in point of fact, there is an educative role for helping parents to understand what's happening in schools. So, you know, I think there's a lot of thinking that says, well, you know, they don't have the expertise to be involved in this, but there's an educative duty that we have to inform them and educate them as to what's happening. And how does that happen? How does it find expression in your planning for engagement activities with your community?
So, what are you doing well? We want to take an appreciative inquiry orientation to this. Yeah, just looking at, okay, This is what we're doing well. This is what we're celebrating in this whole area. So there you go.
And the last thing is monitoring. You know, how do you get a handle on how well you're doing?
You've got 25 minutes. 24 then. Okay, there you go. Under here it says bad grammar, poor spelling, I cannot eat this homework. So dog works in my department. Now I'd like to discuss a new classroom policy. See, teachers, this is engaged governance at the classroom level, right? This is engaged governance. This is joint. This is three-party reporting collaboration. It's decentralized blame. Recess in Drumheller. You see the school board in behind the window? No, it's not. Not anymore. No. they're supervising the playground. The winners and losers. The winner always is always part of the answer. The loser is always part of the problem. The winner always has a program. The loser always has an excuse. The winner says, "Let me do it for you." The loser says, "That's not my job." The winner sees an answer for every problem. The loser sees a problem in every answer. The winner sees a green near every sand trap. This is Fred's metaphor. The loser sees a trap before every green. We identify very much with that. Fred had a new knee put in last year. So in the interim, since you saw Fred last, May, just this year. So he's hobbling around. He looks as though he's hobbling around, but he's always beats me at golf. So I thought this was a great opportunity to get a game with Fred as near as possible to when he had his knee replacement. And he joined. We had this tournament that we go down to Spokane and play, and I thought that was my chance. I thought the window of opportunity was just great. Little did I know the window had closed. And he recovered really fast from his knee. Right. But I guess the mindset, the engagement mindsets here. And there's another mentality here. This is on the staff room notice board. Another day ended, all targets met, systems all clear, parents all satisfied, staff and students all eager and enthusiastic, pigs fed and ready to fly. I guess, yeah, we're talking about...
Okay, Pat.
Okay, and that one, you've seen that one before. Your son could be a school trustee if he doesn't start applying himself. That was Fred's board in BC. They'd got themselves in a lot of trouble, and the community newspaper in Vancouver came out with that.
I cut it out of the paper and put it on the trustee lounge door. The chairman came to see me and said, "Can you believe what somebody did?" I said, "That's disgraceful."
So we're really interested in hearing what you have to say. The appreciative inquiry notion here, what are you doing? What are you doing well? What's working well?
Okay, I'm on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to have just a random go here. What about, are you ready? Are you ready? Is there anybody in this table ready? Okay. Who is going to be the spokesperson? Like, we used to have a rule on this,
Yes.
that, somebody had to record and somebody had to report out. Do you remember that?
Right.
How many group tables have been doing that?
Nobody. One word from you and they do exactly as they like.
Hey, we're not on the same page, folks. Tell everybody where you're from and what you've talked about. What did you do?
So we found out that there's a lot of similarities in our demographics, but some differences as well. We've got a lot more growth than we do, so some things look a little different. Externally, Fort McMurray had a lot of examples. They're very involved with industry. We have some lesser examples of that in our small town rural areas, but doing really, really good work with industry there right in the schools, and not just financial, but where there's actually an involvement from the industry where they're part of the solution and not just the financial solution. Internally, we talked about ways that we can bring people into the schools, opportunities where it's not just about when it's bad news, bringing them in for celebration, food, things along that line that will actually attract people to come in. So a lot of things going on in both school divisions. I'm stopping. Now, if this works really well for the next person.
That was very good.
No, that was good. Okay, is there any group here who would like to speak to this issue? Is there any group here who are proud of what they did?
I could just try and shout. Can you hear me back there? Well, this might be better, so let's go. We really just recently had an exercise at our board where we looked at the kinds of things that we are doing we looked at the kinds of things that we wanted to do and tried to identify where there were some gaps. And we did this from a government's point of view, and it helped us to develop a strategic plan for the remainder of our term. So we were quite excited when we started to look at the kinds of things that we do regularly and we do very well. Some of the kind of things that we do from an internal aspect is we do have liaisons quite often, usually about 4 times a year, more if required, with our staff groups, so with our QP groups, with our teacher groups. So we really have a great relationship with our staff as a result of that. We have mentorship programs for our teachers. We have welcome back barbecues. And one of the comments was, we wish that our parents could see how excited our teachers are during that welcome back barbecue. You know, they're ready to go. They're excited to have kids in their classrooms. We take part regularly in our parent councils. We have a council of school councils that brings the chairs of those councils in to meet with us 3 times a year. We have retreats with our admin. We have long service celebrations where we do school visits where we have our education plans shared visits. We do that on an annual basis. And we continue to be very visible at awards nights and things like that. When it comes to external, we're quite involved with our local Chamber of Commerce. We have a stakeholders conference annually. And that we see as both an internal and an external visibility and working within our community, because not only do we have our teachers and students as part of that stakeholders conference, but we also invite members of our community, you know, from our chamber, from our RCMP, not only parents who are there, but also other community members who are not parents are invited and take part in this. And we look at our 3-year education plan. We talk about what we're doing well, what we aren't doing well, and how that helps us to inform the next as well. We're involved in a number of external committees in our city, you know, with our RCMP, with the further ed, et cetera, et cetera. We think we're a well-informed board and celebrate as often as we can.
Good.
It's pretty comprehensive.
Well said.
And there's a lot going on there. It was interesting, Fred and I, as we were going around, there's a lot of discussion around, okay, what do we mean by external and internal? And it's interesting as you talk to individual boards that meaning takes on different shapes. And maybe depending on the kind of involvement that you've got. And in one group, you know, the discussion of with a group from the business community that are involved in a very collaborative way, it suddenly takes that external and it brings it into the internal kind of hopper. And maybe that's what engagement is all about, broadening that capacity within the system and broadening the internal side of the whole thing. Sherry and company over here wanted to have a little, oh, there we go.
But this is more fun.
Yeah. Right.
We're good. We're good with this.
Yeah. Take your time.
So our group was talking about, at Chinook's Edge, one of the things that we have are matters committees. And so we have a teachers matters, we have support staff matters, and so throughout the division we have different employee groups meeting with our central office staff and trustees to talk about what are the burning issues and find out, you know, how's it going. Without any punitive type of discussion, it's simply we want to hear what's resonating in the communities, in our schools. We've started last year with a Parents Matter committee, so we've now moved it to that external group, and we basically, out of 39 schools, we looked at our communities and handpicked some parents that are movers and shakers in our communities that can now come to us and say, let's have a chat about what's going on. So some of them are parent council presidents, some of them are simply really involved parents and grandparents and whoever they happen to be. And it's a group of about 20, and our school board, the trustees, go to these Parents Matters committees, host them, and get an opportunity 3 times a year to chat with parents and find out what's resonating for them, what's working, what's not. And so we get a chance to test out our communication strategies as well. How is Power School working? How is the emails working, etc. So we're finding that that's really a successful way to go. The other thing that we talked about as well is making sure that we have, at our parent council meetings, convincing our parent councils to invite our municipal partners to the table. For instance, in my community, we have a council rep that is actually, as part of their organizational meeting in the fall, they appoint somebody from the town council to be at the PAC meetings, which again is really useful because now we've got a partner who knows what's going on in our schools. As a trustee, I can talk a little bit about what's happening in the division-wide, and now we have somebody else who knows the issues that can also speak to MLAs and ministers about what's happening and where the pressure points are. So those collaborations, I think, are really critical.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Patrick, Deborah's going to speak.
Deborah.
There you go. Just,
Thank you very much. I totally disagree with something wonderful. That's part. Because, well, we have absolutely and both of us have post-secondary institutions in our community, so we're doing, fair work with post-secondary, not graduate Aspen View is doing quite a bit of work with municipal partners as well and attending interagency meetings, so more community collaboration as well. So, but I'm just excited about all the other ideas that have been coming forward, so that's great.
That's good. And did you appreciate how I respected your personal space? Thank you. All right.
Brilliant.
You want to wrap this up this morning, Patrico?
Well, is there anybody else wants to comment first before we wind up? Over here, yes, right.
Most of our boards are doing the same thing that you've all said, but there's only a couple of highlights that I'd like to do that Grand Prairie Public has done this last year. In building internal collaboration, we started board highlights this year. So it's just in point form, goes out to all our district staff. There's so much new staff in the districts. And the board highlights come out of the meeting. We have a meeting twice a month, so we get it out twice a month. And you have so many people in your community ask, what does a board do? This is our opportunity to show our community and our staff what a board does. So it goes to all the staff, and then you know that staff talks out in the community, so we're hitting external and internal at the same time. The other thing that we started was AVITRA, which is a violent threat risk assessment. This was a absolutely wonderful collaboration. Grand Prairie Public, Peace Wapiti, Grand Prairie Catholic, our Alberta Health Services, our Northwest Alberta Child and Family Services, and RCMP. We got together last spring and we all signed an agreement that we would all work together to help the at-risk kids in all our school divisions.
Brilliant.
Thank you. And here we go.
I'm a musician. I used to talk to large crowds, so I don't need that thing.
That's good. That's very good.
In our table, we talked about communications. Communications are very, very important, and one of the things that we've done in terms of collaboration in our area is we've talked to the papers and made sure that they understand what we're doing and making sure that they know that they are a part of our community, not just to report the news, but to make sure that they become part of the collaboration with us. So we've emphasized to the reporters especially that they be very positive in their reporting. And that has made a huge difference. By doing so, and by using that, putting it back on the websites and so forth, we have managed to get at least twice, if not 3 times the number of articles every single week in the various papers and on the radio and so forth. And that has made a big difference in terms of our collaboration with the community in general.
Thank you very much.
So back to the basic principles here, looking at those notions of flexibility and inclusiveness, variety, opportunity, openness, monitoring. And we didn't really deal a lot with monitoring, but the constant keeping of how you're doing as a board on your policy, on your agenda, and having it there. How are we doing? And occasionally a more formal evaluation of your community engagement efforts. Some really exciting things happening here around the group and with individual boards. And mechanisms for sharing of those kinds of ideas, I think, would be really very valuable. And how can that be done? And you've probably got your own mechanisms within your organization to do that. But as part of the whole board assessment, Fred and I want to finish the day this afternoon with a little bit of attention to that whole notion of assessment. What kinds of questions would you ask yourselves as boards around this whole area of engagement, of community engagement? And so external, internal, how do we manage that? And I think it's a process kind of thing. There's, looking at the moving from external, removing the mystique of the board and stripping away. And we heard that a lot around the groups here, the kinds of impacts that some of these kinds of projects have. And they're value added. They go beyond that kind of initial focus that you have for your specific project to the greater feeling around, yes, this is what the board is about. And that kind of lack of knowledge, and sometimes, it's a lack of knowledge that causes people to not invest. And it's part of the whole process, and we want to talk a wee bit about that this afternoon as well, that starting the whole process with acquainting. And our publics can't be involved immediately. They can't collaborate or advise immedely. They need to be acquainted. And how do you acquaint with the board, with yourselves and so on? To finish off, we've got a sad story here about a guy, a gentleman that lived in Staten Island, wasn't crazy about the ferry. If he missed a ferry late at night, he would have to spend the next hour or so wandering the deserted streets of Lower Manhattan, waiting for the next ferry to arrive. So when one day he spotted a ferry no more than 10 feet from the dock, he decided he would not subject himself to an hour's wait. Gathering all of his energy, he made a running leap over the dock and onto the ferry, landing with a painful thump onto his hands and knees. He may have been a little bruised, but he was safe on the deck. After all, he had recovered from his spectacular feat and brushed himself off. He noticed a bystander curiously watching him. "Well, I made that one, didn't I?" the gentleman said. "You sure did," the bystander replied, "but you should have waited for a minute or two. The ferry is just about to dock." I guess timing is everything, you know, and maybe that's another principle when we're looking at this whole area. After the coffee break, we have Patty Dittrich and the board of High Prairie School Division, the board chair Joyce Dvornek, and presenting about engaged governance and the specific project within their system. And so we look forward to that. This is your midterm exam. We're just a quick question around technology and that kind of thing. How do you confuse an Irishman? You put 3 shovels in the corner and tell him to take his pick. That's about as good as it gets this afternoon. You're in trouble. Levels of attentiveness during instruction. Euphoric excitement, you've already gone past that. Alert attentiveness, relaxed wakefulness, drowsiness, and deep sleep. And there it is. That's, you know, at this time of the day, you've had your lunch, you get nice and comfortable. I think some of you are already down into the relaxed wakefulness part. Some deep thoughts here. Eternity is a terrible thought. I mean, where's it all going to end? Tom Stoppard.
This is my favorite, Woody Allen. I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying.
And my favorite, halitosis is better than no breath at all.
Education may not be the oldest profession, but somebody had to teach them.
Oh, dear.
Okay, all right.
I don't know if a positive attitude works all the time, but a negative one sure does. Their mentalities are around this whole business of governance. Learn the rules so that you'll know how to break them properly. Some delinquent came out with that. Failure, a kamikaze on his 3rd mission. Teenager, God's punishment for enjoying sex. And how is a tornado like a divorce? Either way, somebody loses the trailer.
And this one is for Pat. A professor is someone who talks in someone else's sleep.
And definitions of rumor, something that goes in one ear and in another.
That's gossip.
Right. Okay, that concludes our presentation for this afternoon. There's a definition. Well, that's good for a failing grade in University 2. Nobody has failed University 2. But you're coming very close. Assessment. I like this definition of assessment, actually. It's an inadequate report of an inaccurate judgment by a biased and variable judge of the extent to which a student has attained an undefined level of mastery of an unknown portion of an indefinite amount of material. Maybe, see if we can do, that's the reality we need to work within. And what are our assumptions? This afternoon, in this period of time that Fred and I have got, we'd like to do a number of things here. We want to talk about the issues and tensions. And we were touching on them to a certain extent in that first session. And that beautiful session, the reality and how these things play themselves out within the context of the school systems. And Karen and Joyce, that was just excellent. And what your board is doing around this whole area. And the richness of it, and the themes that underlie all of this whole area of engagement were coming out very significantly for us, and echoing the kinds of things we were talking about when we were dealing with these, standing back and looking at these broad principles. But knowing when and how to engage is an ongoing tension. It's an ongoing issue for us as boards. And grappling with that, making those decisions as we're progressing through that phenomenon.
And from the session before and through the sessions that Karen and Joyce gave, there was an overarching sense, I think, of an issue that's pivotal around engagement. I have a story, a little story. When I was doing my doctoral dissertation, it was about collective bargaining. And
I wrote chapter 2, but I about just, well, 3 as well a bit.
He's so bad. I was using a model by guys called Walton and McCursey, and what they were suggesting is that there are several levels of relationship that boards and teachers get into. And they range from out-and-out hostility, hatred, through mild putting up with the other, to a sort of accommodation and cooperation. And at the other end of the continuum is collusion, where, you know, the parties, you know, violate the public interest in their own interests. And the other thing was, you know, how in point of fact do we get to get philosophical differences ironed out? Well, as I was going through all of the, you know, sort of crunching data and one thing another from questionnaires, couldn't make a lot of sense of some of the data. And so I interviewed, you know, the boards that we were looking at, both teachers and trustees. And we're looking at the data, and it turned out that all of the boards who were in direct conflict with their teachers, the only time that they met the teachers was at the bargaining table. And all of the other boards who had really cooperative relationships, it turned out that they were meeting with the board on several venues about curriculum, about assessment, about professional development, and came to the inescapable conclusion that cooperation is a learned behavior. So if, in point of fact, I mean, if you look at kids, little kids playing in a sandbox, they do not cooperate with each other. They engage in either parallel play, they go to the other end of the sandbox and play with their toys, or they ultimately get into scrapping, petulant behavior, sort of thing that Patrick does all the time. But so
you're bad.
What we're saying is that, and I think what you're saying is that we've got to increase the venues in which board and teachers, trustees and teachers, work together collaboratively.
And the same goes for all relevant publics. Point. Second item here, how do we engage the periphery? How do we engage the uninvolved? And who are the periphery? And so we want to come back to that a wee bit. We want to talk about engagement architecture and thinking about the plan, thinking about the elements that we perhaps should have or think about as we're kind of going through this whole process? How do we, and making sense of it?
In other words, how do we institutionalize engagement in our school districts?
Right. And staying focused on the broader vision, that's there. And within that, how then do we branch out? Are we renewing a vision? Are we do we need to re-examine occasionally on the basis of the kinds of things that we're doing? Towards system-wide engagement, coherence, and getting our act together around, and it's difficult in any complex organization where you've got your principals and your teachers, and you've got individuals at different levels internally, but internally/externally, are we on the same page? And when we're talking about engagement, is everybody talking the same kind of language? And is everybody coming from the same understandings of what effective engagement is and what we need to be doing and what direction what is the direction in which we're going? And those kinds of things that involve communication within, if we're going to be engaging publics, we're really talking as one entity here, and it's system-wide. And so then, you know, there's an interesting article Fred and I have been looking at around islands of excellence. And we want to go beyond islands of excellence. Our schools can't be islands of excellence. I know they've got their own context, and that's very important, and they need to address that context. But where's the system vision within which these schools, with these professionals do their jobs? And how is that conveyed? And then toward reconciling engagement and accountability. And Fred's point about the collaboration and creating multiple venues is a really very good one, taking us from just that pure concern for accountability to marrying it with engagement. So then we're just not dealing with it just as an issue that is a possible conflict-laden issue that we tend to want to run from occasionally.
Myself and Pat like the idea of what we call internal accountability and external accountability. What we have gathered is that internal accountability always should precede external accountability as a matter of professional growth and development. And we certainly have got it wrong in BC. Government, you know, are imposing accountability standards on teachers. All of that comes from the center, top down, and in a not so nice kind of way. So teachers are responding with a kind of what we call pseudo-stupidity. You know, in other words, they will challenge by, you know, sort of making fun of the aspirations of government to have everything, you know, sort of boiled down to a number. So what happens when you rob teachers of being able to exercise internal accountability is you are robbing them of their professional integrity and their professional, what they've been trained to do, to exercise. Now, I'm sure a lot of us talked to the minister of the day, but it fell on deaf ears. Wouldn't happen in Alberta, but there you go.
And then finally, a board self-assessment, which we want to finish off with today, and looking at your board self-assessment around this whole area of engagement. And looking at, this morning we introduced those basic terms by Bridges, and he talked about tests of relevance and tests of expertise. And do individuals that we're thinking of engaging have that relevance? Is it relevant to them? And do they have the expertise? And when we look through the kinds of issues that we're faced with, and some of the changes provincially that we're faced with, and more broadly, restructuring when that occurs, or curriculum restructuring, changing perspectives on leadership and governance. And it's interesting what comes. We want to share a few of those ideas because there's such a connection between leadership and governance. And the leadership literature does have something to add to say to us about this whole area. School councils, provincial government initiatives, technological influences, changes in curriculum. And throughout this list, the big question is, are these areas of relevance to our communities, and which communities? And do our communities have anything valuable to say to us? Do they have expertise that they might share? That was a beautiful discussion, Karen and Joyce, you know, around who we are on our board and knowing each other as trustees. And, and suddenly, lo and behold, when people start talking about themselves and their backgrounds, all the possibilities begin to emerge, and around the possible contributions that can be made. And not only within the board, but within our broader communities. That value, and I guess it's sometimes you could, to use a metaphor, it's a reservoir of untapped resources, our communities. And how do you kind of find where those resources are? And it's that system intelligence of determining where that expertise and that value is to everything that we're doing. Yeah.
So we've got, you know, sort of directions in accountability and evaluation, whether we're dealing with, you know, first order or second order changes. You know, are they big in terms of magnitude, or are they, you know, sort of tinkering and what needs to happen? Because, you know, somebody was talking to me this morning, you know, about, you know, sort of putting Band-Aids over things that are really in need of big-time restructuring. And so we have to be cognizant of whether we're, you know, sort of putting Band-Aids over those things that, you know, that are okay with Band-Aids, or whether we have to have a good, deeper look at what it is that we need to do. And, you know, the whole issue of the changing engagement landscape, and, you know, what's happening in terms of how people work. And, you know, I look at you know, what we're doing with technology in schools, and I think we're reaching another, you know, sort of another leap in terms of what it is that we can do with the technology now, vis-a-vis what we've been doing with it thus far. Am I saying this all right?
Oh, brilliant. It is. Who says it? That's brilliant. Yeah. See, they all agree with me, Fred.
And then, of course, there's the whole issue of the politics of resource allocation. You know, whose ox is going to be gored when resources are scarce, and who has the most political influence in terms of getting things allocated the way they are. I think, you know,
those are tough. Yeah.
I know that. All of us at some point feel that, you know, we have to be the referees in terms of, you know, what goes where. And you've got to be skilled politically. Yeah. Something I'm not very good at.
Do you know, we've recited this to you before, but it's so pertinent now. And I'd love to see this out in communities. That notion of the broader community, the notion of the building mentality. I watched them tearing a building down, a gang of men in a busy town, with a yo-heave-ho and a lusty yell. They swung a beam and a sidewall fell. I asked the foreman, are these men skilled? The kind you would hire if you wanted to build? He laughed and said, why no indeed. Just common labor is all I need. They can easily wreck in a day or two what builders have taken years to do. I asked myself as I went on my way, which of these roles have I tried today? Am I a builder who works with care, measuring life by the rule and square, carefully doing the best I can, shaping my deeds by a well-made plan? Or am I a wrecker who stalks the town, content with the business of tearing down? And you know, just to get at that cynic, and sometimes it's very difficult to do that, but the visibility of a building mentality is a very powerful one. But even the words themselves, in every staff room, in every community room, wherever possible, reaching out with, you know, that basic element. And it's part of that infrastructure, I think, at the bottom of any engagement. Infrastructure is a value. And it'd be lovely to see this being a sort of a type 1 value, to quote Chris Hodgkinson, that we would go to the wall on. This is that notion of the positive that we were dealing with before the coffee break.
I'm glad you mentioned that poem, Pat, because somebody said in the break that we didn't have any poems this time around, and I'm saying we used them all up, and you'd be fed up with them by now.
Well, this was an Irish poet.
Oh, none.
There's Sean O'Casey. There's Lee O'Tolstoy. All the Irish. That's O'Non, this guy. Our publics in the centre and periphery, we just want to turn our attention to then who is on the periphery. We're just putting the question marks here, but looking and examining your own system and saying, who are our centre and who is our periphery? Or are there groups or in our system who are off on this, for one reason or another, off on the periphery?
So what we're talking about here is how do we reach the periphery in terms of engagement? We know, and I think we're pretty good at the central, what Pat called earlier the inner. Was it inner?
Yeah.
And outer?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's good for me.
It was not. It was internal and external.
That's what it was.
Which is the same thing, actually.
So
I think we're pretty good in terms of how we've institutionalized in our schools. You know, parents, families, non-invested supporters. I have no idea who they are. And social services, those kinds. We've got intermediate sort of institutionalized, you know, sort of, albeit a little, you know, sort of low-level institutionalized meetings, if you like, with business and cognate organizations, you know, like post-secondary institutions and social services and so on. But then we have the peripheral, which includes newcomers and those who are shut out, and cynics. You know, so I think Michael Fullen and Andy Hargraves, you know, talks about our need to go to the danger. You know, personally, I think that I just as soon, you know, sort of avoid danger. But, you know, what they're saying is essentially, we need to embrace and challenge those who don't agree with us, those who dismiss what we're doing, and rather than, you know, sort of say, okay, you don't like it, we'll ignore you. Maybe we've got to go out there and get those who are critics and cynics and work with them, try to understand them, get them, more importantly, to understand what it is that we're trying to do. And it's very difficult to go to the danger. It's very difficult to go to those who don't like us, or don't like what we're doing, or are that don't trust us. So we're saying that as we look at how we set up, you know, engagement opportunities, who are we looking at to, and who are those people, and how do we reach them? How do we reach them? How do you reach them?
And sometimes it's mandated for us. If government will mandate a certain level of involvement or a duty that we have toward particular groups? I'm thinking of our cognate organizations, for example. It's mandated that schools shall participate, well, in my province, there's probably some reflection of it in your Education Act, in that schools will, and systems will participate in the training of teachers. So taking interns, those kinds of things. Now it's just a mandated responsibility, and it kind of forces the issue in terms of bringing together. It takes something that might be more on the periphery and bringing it into the center with a logic behind it. And so with that in mind then, the table talk here that we'd like to see is around intelligences. What kind of intelligences can we use to, or do we use, or can we use to understand our publics? How do we hear and respond to the voices of our various publics? Choose your question. Some of you have, and you have been kicking these kinds of things around more concretely in relation to the earlier presentations. And whose voices are muted? And within your system, it's really an examination of your corporate consciousness and conscience around where are we possibly isolating or marginalizing, and for one reason or another. But that's what we'd like to. Just those three basic questions, but choose whichever one you want to respond to.
So,
by the way, with the ground rules on that.
We want you to choose one person to make sure that we've got comprehensive, succinct, and intelligent notes. And somebody else then to talk to them.
Okay, so we'll give you 12 minutes. On attitude, remember that not getting what you want is sometimes a wonderful stroke of luck. Approach love and cooking with reckless abandon. Remember that silence is often the best answer. Sitting around you can't have everything. Where would you put it? It's not whether you win or lose, but where you place the blame. I like that.
I wish the rest of my life would be like this lecture, because it was going on forever and ever.
Your mic's not on. Put your mic on. Wait. Put your mic on. All right. But that was found written, scratched on a desk in the
If you're not listening to each other,
College of Education. Whoa! Fred. This is known as discipline in Ireland.
No.
Don't you ever do that again. A little bit of corporal punishment. Okay. All right. Well. Oh, the stress of this job doesn't bother me. I used to be a junior high school teacher. On attitude, inside every older person is a younger person wondering what the hell happened. I don't know if you're the same, Fred, but you look in the mirror and he looks in the mirror every morning and he said, "What have you done with Fred? Give him back." He thinks he's been captured by aliens.
All right, let's get back to
the feedback.
Feedback.
Big time.
What about this table here? It's working.
Hopefully.
We didn't get to the
Could be worse.
test. Okay, so what intelligences can we use to understand our publics? sorry. So we were saying, of course, there's the technology, internet, social media, and Twitter, and that's for us to be paying attention. I think sometimes when we're in governance, we're so busy sending information out and busy trying to do what we're supposed to be doing that we don't take the time to listen and pay attention to what's going on in our communities around us. Face-to-face meetings, the boards / the schools, we need to go out into our community and work with other organizations and groups with whom we can listen, or from whom we can listen. We can use Stats Canada for basic information, and we can get involved in community events like barbecues and mums and tots groups. And trustees may have, we're in the better position to do that because it's our community. Often our administration and our principals in our schools, they're really, 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 really busy, and it's quite a burden on them to say to them, okay, now you have to go out and do something in the community on top of everything else you're doing. We were elected in our community by our community, and there's an expectation on us to be the ones who listen to the public. How do we respond, or how do we hear and respond to the voices of various publics? We bring to the board what we've understood and heard individually. And that was where we stopped.
That was some really important points here around, are we creating a layer of expectations on our professional staff, for example, unanticipated, and we need, I guess, to be aware of that. And I guess teachers also buy into, and professionals will buy into ideas if it can be translated into gains for their students. And when you talk with parents, parents have a really very significant role to play in student achievement. And sometimes parents need to be reminded of that there's a lot of research out there that connects parents to student gains and student achievement. And with that kind of argument, I think teachers will buy into initiatives.
Our table spent time speaking about the voices that were mute within the community. We spent some time talking about those whose experiences in schools were such that they didn't want to reconnect with the school when their children were involved. We talked about those parents who, when they come to school, end up comparing themselves to the type A personality school parent who's doing everything, and there's a disconnect, the uncomfortable feeling. We also talked about parents whose belief system suggested that the school was responsible for the child once they get to the age of 5. Just wait till the kindergarten teacher gets hold of you. She'll fix you. It obviously doesn't work with everyone. No, you're too old to have kindergarten. I was just teasing. We moved on to talking about ways in which you would actually connect with people, and how do you get that group of people who haven't been your historical supporters, who don't want to be in your school, right? We've tried a variety of ways in terms of even parent-teacher interviews in new locations and things like that, but maybe the first step isn't that. Maybe the first step is a informal hot dog lunch between the staff and people in your community as a general, those sorts of things.
Good. Thank you very much. Well said. And have we touched base with you this day?
You wonder what happened to Fred. I look in the mirror and say, who the hell's that? I think the two things we talked about were the mute voices. One was the student. We don't do it to them, or we don't do it for them, we do it with them. And often we don't listen to them. School councils, particularly high school councils, that have a student representative there, that representative usually has something important to say. The second group, and a concern that I have at my age, is seniors, because they are often excluded not only not from the school, but for a good part of the community. They become a little bit isolated in and of themselves. And one of the best things I've seen happen in schools is when you can incorporate the students working with the seniors. We have a group of grade 8 kids that go over to the senior center on Wednesdays to teach the seniors how to use the computers. A marvelous success.
Yeah, fabulous.
Thank you very much.
It's very interesting.
Well said. Okay, we have...
moving on and talking about the engagement architecture piece here. Fred and I, in working through this, wanted to pull out themes that we felt were significant in this area. When you're looking at it, the intelligence we've talked about, reading the public, having various means of getting information and knowing our environment. Education and the educative role, and we talked about that this morning, the educative role that we owe to parents and community groups, because it's only on the basis of being acquainted or having knowledge about something that we will consider being engaged with it. And I think it makes common sense. And the motivation, and there's maybe a presupposition here, or there's an order to all of this, when perhaps motivation should come first. You know, what order do we consider, or do individuals and groups consider being engaged or being involved? And perhaps motivation is a key element. But we address that more in the interest of capturing the individuals and groups who are shut themselves off from the system, and regardless of whether they've got kids in school or not. And monitoring, how do we continue to read what we're doing and how well we're doing in this area, and having that as a dialogue within the system.
I really like the idea that was forwarded this morning, that you know, we should look at formal ways to institutionalize this kind of monitoring process. I like the idea that somebody from outside was contracted to, you know, sort of take the pulse of whether, in point of fact, you know, the engagement process was working and what else might happen with it. I think it's like anything else. The monitoring and assessment is often a piece that's left out. So how do you build on, if you're going to have, for example, community forums, the assessment of that is going to provide impetus for the next round of development of goals and objectives and those kinds of things.
Now, we've got 10 minutes left here in our piece. I just want to reintroduce you to this notion of Stirner, and some of you might recall it, the process of committing. And we think this is a valuable piece in the whole argument around engagement. Acquainting, starting with the bottom left-hand quadrant, through involving and investing and into committing.
So what he's saying is that there are two important considerations in terms of engaging people and getting them on board. There's the sense of connection, which is the vertical axis there, and then there is the time and energy expended. You know, it is not fair to ask somebody, are they committed to this?
Or even to level the evaluation that an individual is not committed.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, I may not be committed now. I may have been committed already. Okay. I may not be committed now, but I may become committed to this particular aspiration if I'm given the time, to be acquainted, if I can become involved, if I then have the opportunity and capacity to invest in that, and then I can commit. So commitment is a process, and we have to give it time to play out. And we have to accept the fact that, you know, people might look like they're being committed, but they may fall down. It's like, you know, what Michael Fullan, the great change, you know, sort of guru says, that you're going to have a what we call an implementation dip.
You're going to hit a brick
wall. You're going to go down, and then, given the time and the effort and the energy, we can then...
So then, to whom are our students or our schools accountable? How do we engage? And Fred and I have been kicking this around, and Fred made the point in our discussion around this whole thing. Let's talk about what matters most. And student learning is at the heart of everything. So then when we're talking engagement, for example, what does our engaged focus look like then when we're talking about teaching and learning? The opportunity to learn. Robert Marzano talks a lot, and they've got a phenomenal amount of research that talks about opportunity to learn as being one of the most significant elements in student learning, obviously. And is the opportunity there? Is the time there available for kids? And are we providing the time? And where's the discussion around the community in relation to that? The attention to academic learning time. And so we've got the minister at one end saying this is so many days in the year you're going to be devoting to teaching and learning. But by the time that's all translated down through the system, and days off and professional development and so on and so forth, what is that proportion look like? And even if you also factor in what is happening at the school level around disruptions and announcements and how does that figure in relation to the amount of time, academic learning time available to kids? I think that is one area, for example, that we could be engaging our communities in discussing. How do we protect academic learning time? And maybe even look at it in relation to some of the creative possibilities. And I know some systems are toying with even a different shape to the school year and the school week and the school day. And there's so much there, so much richness in terms of that engagement. And then this full scope of learning. And we can't do everything. There's one of the biggest tensions of all when we're talking about the full scope of learning. There's only so much we can do. Resources are limited. And so when you look down that list of technological education, arts education, inquiry-based learning, and so on, where are our limitations or limits? And that we have to make some pretty hard decisions, you know, as a board. But when it comes down to those hard decisions, who's involved, and you know, is there dialogue, you know, and conversation around that?
Well, Pat and I believe very, very strongly in two issues with respect to student learning that are absolutely fundamental to student success in school. One is attention to membership. How do we get kids, how do we ensure that every child feels valued in the community in which they are learning? How do we ensure that they feel good about themselves, that they feel safe,
that they belong,
that they are secure, and that somebody there loves them? That is absolutely critical in terms of the capacity of any student to learn. And the other is, that was membership. The other is engagement. You know, that we're there to learn. So what kinds of structures do we put in place to ensure that every child has the opportunity to learn, and how do we give them the tools with which to get the skill sets that they need, and how do we evaluate and monitor it so that we can take corrective action? Those are the two things that are fundamental.
We've got 6 minutes left. In that time, just looking at the elements here around student achievement, instructional quality, school capacity, and within the school, the teacher's knowledge and skills and dispositions, And the notion of policies and programs on professional development. You know, we make the point, and Robin Brain, also a colleague of Fred's, makes it frequently, that while it is true that individual schools are the places where positive and enduring change happens in large-scale reform, the support for that change must be activated, supported, and buttressed at the district level. And it takes us right back to our role and our understanding of some of these elements of academic engagement and time on task. Do you know, a couple of additional points. Number one, this is really an action research. When you're looking at yourselves as a board, you're involving in this area of engagement and the kind of activity that Karen and Joyce had this morning. Thinking around planning, acting, evaluating, where you're involved in planning, you get the action going around these particular strands and ideas, great ideas that were coming out from the group, and then evaluating.
Yeah, so that begins with diagnosing, focusing, and refocusing. So identifying issues, asking what's possible, what can be done differently, and in discussion with other professionals to ensure that we have it right. Why are you doing that?
Well, do you know, Fred, we just want to share with you before we quit a piece of research that Fred was involved in out in Simon Fraser. A $2 million study over what individual predispositions related to shapes. So how many of you around the group, you know, in terms of looking at yourselves, how would you describe yourself as a shape? Would you see yourself as a rectangle with kind of two sides longer than the other? Or would you see yourself as a square, sort of fair, straightforward? Would you see yourself as a triangle with that sort of basic sort of pyramid sort of shape with three sides to you, a bit edgy? Or would you see yourself as a circle, full, complete and full? Hands up those who see themselves as a rectangle. Square. Very quick study here. Triangle. Who sees themselves as circles? Now, this is the results of Fred's study. This... There's a lot of work went into that study. But hey, I'm sorry, you don't shoot the messenger.
Congratulations to all the squares.
Fred and I have got to the point where we've run out of room and run out of time because of lack of time consideration. But we do want to draw your attention to the last two slides here. By the way, Fred and I, you will know now, have messed terribly with the slides that you got on your USBs. We will send this to whoever needs to get it, Patty and company, and we'll send that with all our sort of illustrations that we've used during the course of the day. And most importantly, those two slides at the end, board engagement, your own self-assessment around engagement. It's the shot that we've taken on it, but we just leave it in your hands.
So at the end of the day, you will need, I think, whether this is a starting place or an end place as you begin to evaluate what you're doing, you need to ask questions like, do we continually seek new ways of engaging our publics in system governance? Does our board assess the needs and aspirations of the public? Do we know who holds our board accountable? Are we keeping public education on the political radar scene? Do we consider how social media might be used to stay in touch, collect ideas, hear concerns, and to flag potential issues for consultation? And is community engagement considered as a factor in our board's self-assessment as part of that?
Poem.
We are on again, you know, at the end of this. Did you know? Yes, you're not even consulting the program.
Are we on again? Oh, this is cool. Forget it. Forget what I've...
So we'll be able to wrap up in a better way. In a better way. But I do have a poem. It's written by a guy called Spike Milligan. Does anybody know about Spike Milligan?
That's
one of the original goons. Anyway, he had a... There was a guy, and I went golfing, and there was a guy put in our group, and I said, "What's your name?" And he said, "Ned." His name was Ned. I said, "Well, that's interesting. My name is Fred." So when I got to know him a little better, you know, at about the 14th hole, I said, "Now, there's a little poem about Fred and Ned. It's written by Spike Milligan, and it goes like this."
It's very moving.
It says, yeah, it would bring a tear to a glass eye. But what he says is, this is the poem. It's about two soldiers. He said, Soldier Neddy was always ready and steady. But Soldier Freddy, unlike Neddy, was never ready and steady. Which is why, when Soldier Neddy was standing outside Buckingham Palace in the pouring wind and rain, Freddy was home in beddy.
You see the depths to which we have plunged.
So we'll talk to you again after the next presentation.
The discussion that we were finishing off with you was around self-assessment, and we'd like to leave those with you, those basic questions. And as you move through, have a look at those. Go back yourselves and design and develop your own approach to assessment. You may consider some of those questions or all of them, but it's engaging that process on a continuous basis. How are we doing? Where are our strengths? Where do we perhaps need to invest a little bit more effort, and so on. And so, you know, what have we done today? We've looked at a variety of different principles associated with effective governance. Fred and I have promised that we would forward you the material around what we have actually done rather than what we initially shared with you. So that will come your way. And, you know, I really like the way this was planned today. Paddy and company, the way this all dovetailed into a really very fine set of perspectives on engaged governance that didn't really trip over each other. These two sessions, looking at what your systems are doing and the examples, and the High Prairie system, looking at at engagement in action, looking at the specifics of what boards are doing in a very concrete sense, and giving you the opportunity to grapple with that whole notion of engagement in action. And then with Kim's, standing back and looking at the broader picture around engaged governance and that whole idea of generative of governance and the underlying thinking behind it was really a very complementary pair of presentations, and gave you a good opportunity to engage conversation as much in the broader questions and issues and the reflection as much as the concrete issues that boards are grappling with every day and every year. And so it's within that context, you know, that some broad themes for Fred and I have been coming out as we've been ourselves just reflecting on what the discussions and the presentations have been dealing with. And that continuing, a couple of points here, the continuing need for reflection, and reflection in action and reflection on action. Very quickly, at the end of our session, we talked about action research, and it really is that you need that combination of action, reflection, planning. Action, reflection, planning in a spiral kind of process that continues throughout your 4-year terms, but throughout the existence of your boards of education and your communities. And you know, we pose the question, what legacy will you leave? You know, at the end of all of this, we'll be posing that question. And will you be able to create, in terms of that generative engagement, a process whereby the communities themselves and your sub-communities will be able to continue to engage that as trustees and as boards come and go. And that, I think, is as good a legacy that you can leave as anything else. That sort of self-perpetuating action research approach. And one thing that we also would like to put on the table and keep on the table, and that's the notion of the appreciative inquiry mentality. And it's very easy to start off that kind of engagement discussion by asking, what's wrong? Where are we going wrong? And I think, you know, and it comes out in your discussions. I think there's the natural tendency is toward the positive. What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing well? Sometimes we have to take our skeptics and maybe put them in their place around your approach to dealing with problems. So what's wrong with saying, hey, what are we doing well? And what are our wishes for the future as we're kind of moving forward? And it's those kinds of issues that we believe are important. We also believe acquaint, in terms of the process, acquaint before you can engage, where individuals and groups are brought into the whole discussion in a meaningful kind of way.
So, in short, I think the two main issues around here was it's building community, building by community, by engaging community in a positive way. The other issue I think is, which I heard over and over again, in terms of engagement and involving communities in planning, the quality of the upfront action that we have is critical. Whatever we like, whatever nomenclature we like to use, I like the idea of generative thought, generative inquiry, and generative action. But it's like the old saw, you know, when we were first, you know, sort of working with computers. You know, it was, the old saying was, garbage in, garbage out. So when we're looking at that whole way of doing things, if we're upfront and careful and thoughtful and creative about what we're doing, and if we can engage more and more people in that process, the better chance we have of getting quality in and quality out. This has been, in many ways, about community and about building community, and that's the way that we're going to finish. It's with that poem from Stromberg. And, you know, he says, one hot summer day, while lying on my back in my yard, I heard a distant sound of a far-off train on a distant track. At about 5,000 feet, the head goose suddenly veered out to the right. The formation kept growing wider until he found a place at the back of the line. They didn't even miss a beat. And that's how I found out how the geese can fly from way up north to way down south and back again. But that's something he cannot do alone, you see. That's only something he can do in community. It's a wonderful thought, and people like and swell with emotion and pride to think of themselves on the eagle side, solitary, self-sufficient, and strong. But we are what we are. That's something that we cannot choose. And though many would like to be seen as the eagle, I think that God made us more like the goose. So that's it. We want to extend our thanks to you for being such a great audience.
And for tolerating Fred.
We like coming here. All right.